Ladies and gentlemen, the New Orleans Saints have made some insane moves at the wide receiver position, and now we know who Derek Carr will be throwing to for the 2023 season. And we also have Raiders fans not able to move on from Derek Carr, still going after the guy on social media. Plus, there's a big update on the Jimmy Graham situation. We're breaking it down. Subscribe to this channel if you have not yet. The former third-round pick in the 2020 draft for the Raiders, Bryan Edwards, the wide receiver, was released today by the New Orleans Saints. Sort of unfortunate because you saw this guy get bounced around the NFC South. He was sent to the Falcons last year through a trade by swapping some day 3 picks between the Falcons and the Raiders. And then this past season, he was signed by the Saints, and we thought maybe his chemistry with Derek Carr would help him make this 53-man roster. But unfortunately, after several offensive PI penalties against the Chargers in this past preseason game, and also a lackluster performance overall throughout training camp, Bryan Edwards has been released. And I was really disappointed by this because I really do think this guy is talented. I've seen him pop off when he's healthy with Derek Carr on the Raiders. But unfortunately, it just has not worked out, and I think the injury bug has gotten to him. He dealt with injuries coming out of college. And ultimately, I think another team will give him a shot, but it looks like being a former Raider doesn't help you automatically make the 53-man roster with the Saints this year. And so when we're looking at the wide receivers of the Saints, we're getting a clear picture as to who Derek Carr is going to throw to this year. We know they have Michael Thomas, who looks like he's healthy. Chris Olave is pretty much the #1 wide receiver after having a sensational rookie year last year. And then you also have Rashid Shaheed, who has not been healthy lately. He's a speedster, but we have not seen this guy in preseason, and we have not really seen him in joint practices. And this has opened the door for a number of Saints receivers like Lynn Bowden Jr., another former Raider selected in the 3rd round of 2020, who is on the Saints roster. This guy had a great game against the Chargers, doing really well in terms of special teams and punt return. It really seemed like he found a way to carve himself out a role there and was productive on the offensive side of the football going up against some backups. And this guy's story is interesting, being out there in Kentucky, having to switch from wide receiver to quarterback because they needed somebody, and he ended up being an amazing mobile QB in 2019. He dug out the MVP tape of Lamar Jackson to try to get a feel of things, and he really could be a Swiss Army knife type player. That is what John Gruden selected him to be in 2020. He was hoping he would be the next Taysom Hill before the Raiders, and unfortunately he did get released because Mike Mayock allegedly thought that he was having a bad influence on some of the other players, and the Raiders ultimately cut Lynn Bowden Jr. after he never took a snap in the regular season for them. So Lynn Bowden has been making a splash, 6 targets and 3 receptions throughout preseason so far for 40 yards. We mentioned his skills in the punt return game, but you also have A.T. Perry, who got the most targets out of any wide receiver throughout these past 2 games of training camp. 9 receptions, 92 yards, great PFF grades, 74.7 overall grade, 73.8 receiving grade. And Bryan Edwards, you see the lack of production there. 9 targets, 2nd most targets throughout all of preseason, but only 3 receptions and 37 yards. And we saw Keith Kirkwood make a play for the Saints in the red zone. That's his only target of all of preseason with Derek Carr in the first team offense. That looks good for him if he's higher on the depth chart than many people realize. But I think the undrafted free agent Shaquan Davis did a lot better in this past game compared to week 1 against the Chiefs when he only had 2 targets. He had 5 in this past game and picked up 63 yards and 85.2 overall PFF grade. So we have a USFL reporter, Logan Graffia, talking about the Saints, but I do agree with his projection here. I think it's going to be A.T. Perry, Lynn Bowden Jr. for the special teams reasons, and then Shaq Davis would be a bold prediction to be that 6th wide receiver on the roster now that Bryan Edwards is no longer there. And I think the Saints are going to want 6 wide receivers on the roster because we don't really know what's going on with Rashid Shaheed, and also Michael Thomas is still coming back from the years and years of injuries. And the Saints are plagued with more injuries in a linebacker. Ryan Conley, who was doing quite well against the Chargers last week, had a pretty significant knee injury. He was not at practice, probably not going to be around for some time. But on the plus side, Demario Davis, Andres Pete, both participated in their back at practice. And more issues with linebacker. Nick Lalos also suffered an injury, and the dude was doing well in preseason, but the man who did even better than both these guys was Jalen Smith, recently signed linebacker by the Saints. We know he visited several teams like the Raiders, Raiders and then eventually landed with the Saints. And he showed up in this past preseason game. Great insurance policy for Demario Davis if anything ever happened. And we know the Jimmy Graham situation went out of control on social media. TMZ, all the different reporters went on it as soon as the guy was arrested. He was arrested and cops saw him wandering in traffic. He was walking. He wasn't driving, wandering in traffic. And law enforcement responded to the call saying that he was acting erratically. And apparently he resisted arrest when they tried to arrest him. And everybody was jumping on Jimmy Graham, acting like he's crazy. And it turned out he had a medical issue. The Saints released a statement regarding this, saying that he was taken into custody by local authorities, transported to a local hospital for evaluation, believes he likely had a seizure and he had to spend the night under medical supervision. And so he doesn't have any charges. He's good to go. And it turns out that he's actually expected to be back at practice this week. Hopefully, if he does have a medical issue with regards to seizures, nothing happens for him in this upcoming season. But it seems like the Saints think he's good. He thinks he's good, which is crazy because he could have been a little off his rocker. We're not quite sure exactly the cause of this episode, but at least he's going to be back playing this week and everybody thinks it's okay. Some people are not okay and some Raiders fans just cannot move on from Derek Carr, and it's usually the haters who cannot move on from this guy, and they're even spreading fake reports and fake news about the current quarterback of the New Orleans Saints, completely making up lies and reports that don't even exist. You have them claiming that Saints fans want Jameis Winston to start over Derek Carr after an impressive outing in LA, which makes absolutely no sense because Jameis Winston had 0 touchdowns, 169 yards, 61% completion percentage in this past game. No disrespect to him, but there was nothing significant that happened in that past game. And the guy who posted this seems to be completely making it up. And if you look at his picture, I mean, he kind of does not look like too happy of a camper. Maybe he doesn't have a lot going for him right now. So he's got to make up stories about the former quarterback, and you have Saints people chiming in saying this is so far from the truth. The only people who said that was probably like 2% of the fan base. Please stop this nonsensical narrative. And we have a Saints fan and writer for Sports Illustrated Now, Chris, talking about this, saying that it's hilarious that Raiders fans claim they no longer care about Carr despite always posting about him. And it was just sort of a boring game, unfortunately, last week against the Chargers. There were no fans. The hurricane was in the background, and nobody watched this game thinking, oh man, we need a QB change. But the Saints are looking ahead to week 1 against the Titans, just about 3 weeks away. Have some people not practicing like Rashid Shaheed, Taysom Hill, Marshawn Lattimore. Those are some concerns right there. Hopefully this team gets healthy before the regular season starts. Let me know in the comments what you think the wide receiver room of the Saints is going to look like this year, and if you think they need to pick somebody up. Are they having desperate times right now? My name is WiFiWillie. Peace out, and I hope you have a good one.